thank you guys for coming to our conversation with Terri and Michael Place today. They're coming from the Baobab Home, which is in Tanzania, and they'll explain more of that later today. Camille's going to start by just telling you a little bit about EnSoil Algae. My name's Yazzie, and we have Meredith from our team here too. And then after that, I'll tell you how we got introduced to Terri and Michael, and then we'll have a little Q&A, and they'll tell us their story.
I'm Camille. I'm the Director of Grower Support at Enlightened Soil Corps. Our company's mission is to empower farmers and land stewards in the effective and profitable implementation of a regenerative agriculture system. So we work with Chlorella vulgaris, which is a strain of freshwater microalgae. We grow this in photobioreactors, in labs in the US. You can see our bottled product below, and then the cells that are in the bottle above. We're really committed to soil health and education and supporting farmers in profitable systems. Guided by our connection to the earth and the interdependence of life, we're very inspired by nature's design and human innovation. And we take a systems approach to our work. So that's for people and for the planet and for nourishing food. Our product is OMRI listed, and most of the growers working with us are using this in agriculture systems, also in home systems and gardens and lawns and golf courses and whatnot. But really the algae are working with soil biology to stimulate the microbiome and reduce stress, help the plants adapt to stressful environments, improve the nutrient cycling and the recruitment of the right biology to support the system. So very, very holistic, systemic approach that we take to working with our growers. And we are super excited for all of the connections and partnerships that we make along the way. One of those is Terri and Michael from Baobab. So we always talk about kind of a stacked solution. And one of the pieces of that is education and community building, which is really the intention behind the webinar. So I'll turn it back over to you, Yas.
Thank you, Camille. So how we got introduced to Michael and Terri, my mom, she used EnSoil Algae for the first time last year. She's a first-time gardener and used the algae and had incredible results and posted about it on Facebook. And Jason Letter, who is a board member with the Baobab Home and an incredible human being that I've gotten to know now, he reached out and was saying how the Baobab Home is using regenerative practices, and he thought that Michael and Terri would be interested in this, and they were very interested. We're just constantly all inspiring each other with different ways to implement these practices and help the community. And for Terri and Michael, it's in Tanzania with the Baobab Home. So I'll let them introduce themselves, and then we'll start with the Q&A.
Hi, everybody. I am Terri Place, and my husband Mwandu and I we founded the Baobab Home in 2004. We've been going ever since. It's been evolving. We'll get into that in a little while, but yeah, I'm originally from the United States, but I've been in Tanzania for about the past 22 years.
I'm Terri's brother and a board member with Baobab Home since before we even had a formal board. So I go back, I come with the furniture, so to speak. We've had a unique journey with what Terri and Mwandu created. Over the decades, we've sort of had a global family of donors and an enormous amount of support from a small group spread around the globe. And but yeah, I also have been working in a agricultural environment that, if you take out EnSoil, has many of those pillars are sort of identical. And so I've been watching EnSoil for years, well, not years, but I think it was close to 2 years when the connection that Yasmin mentioned happened. So I was super excited to meet the team and to get more inside understanding of where their work is heading, and it happens to include the continent of Africa. And so, yeah, it's been great. I'm the CTO with a company called Chapul Farms. We work with insect agriculture, but again, honoring nature, systems thinking, the biology of soils is a big part of our present and future. So really just delighted to be extending our community and meeting the work we do in at Baobab, I think, as you'll hear, is very aligned with all of this. So.
Yeah, thank you guys. So to get into the Baobab Home, what is the Baobab Home and what inspired its creation?
When I came to Tanzania in the beginning, the HIV/AIDS crisis was at its worst. It was right before ARVs became available, and people were still dying all the time without medicine. And so there were a lot of babies without breastfeeding mothers, and the government at that time asked us to Mwandu and I knew that we wanted to start a home for children, and that's what we were asked to do, was to take in babies and provide formula to them until they could be returned to their family. And the ones who stayed were the ones who we couldn't bring back to family, where family wasn't safe enough. And so that's how the Baobab community was built. And over time, it's just evolved. We've added. We for a while we sent street boys to school. There was a street boy home that closed, and we took in 11 young men from that home and saw them through high school and some college and trade schools. We also have a breakfast program where we have fed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of healthy breakfasts over the years to, for the first few years, to orphans and most vulnerable children. And nowadays, for the last 10, 12 years, to everyone getting medicine for HIV. So when they come to get their medicine, they always get a hot breakfast. And so that's always been part of who we are. And then since 2008, we moved to our farm, and then but had a lot of building to do. We had to build homes for everyone, and the school started in 2012.
So you mentioned you moved to a farm. So how has the vision of the Baobab Home changed over time, especially in relation to the role of agriculture in the community?
The vision was always there about agriculture, but we were so busy in the beginning growing the school, building the buildings, keeping the kids fed, they were young at that point. So I think that my vision of agriculture was very naive, and all I wanted to do was keep chemicals off the farm. That was all. That was as simple as I could be. And I just didn't have the bandwidth at the time. But my brother kept that vision alive, and I'm very grateful to him for that. His work with black soldier flies, and just he kept learning and growing and feeding me bits of knowledge, what I could get, and I was keeping it all in there. And now it's time. It's like it's evolved. Just like pretty much everything we've done, it's kind of evolved out of necessity, and this is just where we need to be to keep ourselves growing and growing as an organization, but more so than that, just as human beings living in this space, to keep it alive so that it can keep us alive. So this is this is how we've gotten to this point.
Yeah, and Terri mentions, being busy taking care of kids and some of the history she gave there. In the middle of the, the 2008 and the farm becoming the foundation for the Baobab Home, and the Stephen Tito Academy is our primary school. That school explosively grew to over 200 students. And every year we have a line of applicants who are interested in attending the school. So you can imagine adding the daily hustle and bustle of a school for several hundred children, feeding them. Farming always seemed to be sort of part of the vision and an important piece of the puzzle. But as Terri said, it's continued to come more into focus as we've grown through some of those hectic years over 2 decades. But it's really been a huge part of the vision, being on 15 acres of land, with and wanting also to instill that in the children there too. The importance of health and being conscious of your food and avoiding some of the pernicious choices that are always there. So it's a great complementary situation. On the the shamba, by the way, is the Swahili word for the farm.
In the beginning, it was also my vision to have a green school, to have farming be part of the curriculum. But when we just couldn't do it. And that's Jane Goodall describes what she called her Damascus moment as being the time when she could no longer just research chimpanzees, that she had to be concerned with the environment that they live in, because there was just no point. And I just so strongly identified with that, where it was like, okay, we could take in another generation of kids in the orphanage, and we could keep, churning kids out in the government curriculum school, but why? what are we actually doing if we keep doing that, if we're not really teaching them about the place that they live in and how to inhabit that space? The school that when my husband was younger, education was quite a bit different. Most schools had a school garden, and I think that education was sort of more organically Rudolf Steiner-ish, in that kids were staying on the farm with their grandparents until whenever, and when the family was ready, then the kid went to school. But meanwhile, they'd picked up so much. And now the trend is to get them in chairs at age 5 and get them in front of books. And it's much more rigid. And I think that what we're doing is different than that. We have to follow the rules and live within that structure, but keep them out of the classroom as much as we can too, and to sort of combat that trend a little bit. I think it's working.
Yeah, and just to sort of double down on the importance of that, if you think about, and I assume most listening are probably in a Western context, U.S., we've now consolidated in an industrial ag era down to, I think it's now under 2% of the country is involved in farming. And sometimes, in the circles that we're in, maybe it seems larger, but we've really taken that out as a sort of a pillar of employment. These trajectories, globalized industrial food, they're happening in East Africa too, but Tanzania's, got 65% of the population involved in agriculture. Many of those are small holders, and so keeping that connection to farming as opposed to going down that road, which I think most would agree is we're unwinding the problems of that consolidated overproducing, that system is not serving us, and most agree on the brokenness of it. And so helping to stem that tide by connecting children to their food, to the possibilities of employment in the future in agriculture, which is a big topic in East Africa. I think that's all of a piece in terms of the education and the, not losing what Terri's husband did from the gardens and the practical obviousness of it in Tanzania, some 30 years ago.
Yes, I definitely, being from the United States, there wasn't any outdoor time during school. So what you guys are doing, I think, is a really good model for everyone. How have the kids, how do they enjoy working on the farm?
Well, maybe a quick summary of the different pieces that have been built into the Shamba over the years. Years ago we started with a biogas grant from the U.S. Embassy and started to leverage renewable energy That helps, power the kitchen for all the healthy meals that are provided, which is a big fun time to be at the Shamba. Since then, we've added, in addition to the crops that we're working with and the evolving relationship with that and the soil, we have poultry, we have 2 aquaculture ponds, we have a black soldier fly system that takes the kitchen scraps and transforms that into protein and biofertilizer. And so, yeah, I think that you made the point before about, as opposed to putting the kids to work, they get more curious. The insects, not to just talk about my bias, but the novelty, if you will, of the aquaculture ponds and the insects are definitely highly attractive to the kids. And, they range in age quite a bit. But maybe Terri could speak more to the longer term involvement of the kids in all the areas of the farm.
So mostly it's not that they're doing work per se. We try to make the farm the outdoor classroom. And so they have an agriculture club every Thursday. The agriculture club meets and they do things in the garden. They've merged at times, although not presently, with the business club and tried to do little, things there. But mostly it's more just what they're learning. So I'm really excited because in July I have a team from Switzerland. There's a university there that I'm working with, and 7 women are coming, all in different science fields, and I'm pairing each of them with one of the teachers so that the teacher will have their assistant, and so that they can help green their portion of the curriculum. So as of now, we've done it more ad hoc when we have volunteers, but now they're going to each have their own teacher or assistant teacher to help, because the teachers are learning as well. They're learning all kinds of new things. So they're sort of unlearning how they were taught to teach and learning new methods to teach. So I think July is going to be a very creative month at the school for greening. So yeah, but anyway, the kids love it, and I think that, to me, it's just beautiful to look out the window and see them running in trees and grass and on playground equipment where it's just so unusual. That's just not the norm here. And I know that they don't care, and usually they don't notice it until they leave. They get older and they come back, and then they start to say they feel it. So, but they shouldn't have to be grateful for their environment. They don't know the difference really. But they see it later. And for that, I'm glad, and I hope it stays with them. And I hope that they, retain what they learned about education and the environment when they have their own kids and move on to their next stages.
Yeah. Yeah, hopefully some of them start their own farms and grow more chemical-free food.
Well, the one thing too that I can remember when I was more involved in teaching was that a lot of them come from farming families, as Michael said, but one of the worst insults that you can give to somebody is to call them mshamba. It means, like, if you put an M in front of the farm word, it means like you're backwards, or you're provincial or something like that. So it's really an insult. And so it's really important to me to dispel them of that notion, to think, to help them to believe how important the role that their parents or grandparents or uncles are doing is, and there's nothing backward about it.
I just say too, that Big Ag has done a very good job at creating a perception that smallholders are not as relevant as they are. There's 35 million smallholder farmers in Tanzania. So Terri's mentioning the cultural values and the sort of, trying to relegate this in a modernity context to something unimportant. Around the globe, we're talking about something closer to 600 million smallholder farmers. And you might suggest that there are some biases in terms of analyzing just how productive this group is and how important they are to the current food system, let alone unwinding some of the problematic areas at scale that we see here and in, industrialized agriculture. So it's really a crucial foundation. And I already mentioned, the future of employment wise in East Africa, you're not going to, I don't think it's likely that they could even potentially race to an industrialized model to backtrack like we have. So that transition is really crucial, figuring out what the right scales are for a very distributed, localized farming landscape. That'll involve some technology and some modern concepts. But as we know with the soil, I think that it's really a huge opportunity to not make the same mistakes we saw in the industrialized agricultural world.
Yeah, definitely. And then Terri, I wanted you to share a little bit about, obviously you're stepping into, you've been in Tanzania now for 22 years. But you're, in terms of agriculture, like you're stepping into this new cultural context where there are different farming traditions and different knowledge, and you're always traveling around and learning from people. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that and how you learn about different practices to bring to the Shamba and the Baobab Home in general.
So a couple of years ago, we, with Michael and another board member, helped to initiate an interview project that we had with elderly farmers in the neighborhood. Because also what we just spoke about, big ag has drastically impacted how people do agriculture. And so we interviewed those people and tried to get native seeds from them and tried to talk about what the land looked like then and just try to re-envision the space. Like, what did it look like when they were younger? So I it's hard. It's actually really challenging because it's not like I feel a lot of the times like I'm fighting some the outcome of some kind of green revolution, like I'm trying to I see a lot of people still believing in what they learn at the seed store where they buy their seeds drenched in chemicals. And so I was mentioning today to Michael that the people I listen to for guidance right now are my husband's great grandfathers, because they came they were living in the pre-colonial Tanzania, and they were actually chiefs a couple hundred years ago, and they were basically deposed by colonialism. And it's that Tanzania that I feel that agroecology and regenerative agriculture can get us back to. And so I kind of want to bypass what is now and go back to that. And that's the check that I have, that like, am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right track? Would they approve? Yes, they would. Then I think I'm okay. They're who I reference. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it did. I like that idea, the interviewing the elderly farmers in the community. There's so much knowledge there.
Yeah, it was fascinating. And it's harder and harder to find them. And it's harder and harder to find the old seeds. And we really have to search for them. And there are a few other people who try and keep seed banks of native seeds, but it's tough. yeah, it was great to listen to those stories. There was a guy who, our neighbor who we bought a piece of our land from, told us about a tree that we still had on the farm, and how he used to see a lion there all the time, like just sitting under that tree. And like, nobody's seen lions in our area for a while, but the fact that he remembered it was a beautiful connection. Um, yeah, and our farm used to really be a part of the sisal. Tanzania used to be a giant sisal plantation, when sisal rope was was what everybody needed. And so our farm used to be part of hundreds of acres of sisal.
Hmm. And did you learn that? Did you already know that, or did you learn that from someone in the community?
No, I learned that from someone in the community, but then I learned on further research, I learned that the sisal was brought over in the mouth of like an alligator or something from Mexico or something. It was a crazy, crazy addition to the story. So, yeah.
On that note, like those kind of rewarding moments of what you're doing, like building a thriving community, there's a lot of obstacles. What's been one of your most rewarding moments in the journey? Like maybe a specific moment or just in general?
I was really glad that you asked this question, because I thought about our obstacles before, but looking at this question, I realized that we have we've turned so many obstacles into good things. And one of the most prominent ones that come to mind was that when one of the young boys, in our orphanage, he died of AIDS in 2010, and he shouldn't have died. Like, it didn't have to. It was just bad care that he got before he got to us, and it was painful for all of us to lose Stephen. But turning our school's name into his name has brought, it brings him back every day. He's alive with us, and all he wanted to do was go to school back then, and he just wanted to be normal. And I like to think that he helps keep things going by letting other kids go to school who just have the same dream. Yeah, and we also have one story. Actually, the story of our farm is an obstacle. Like, Kaito and I went to take our first vacation in 2008.
Under
And
duress, we were forcing them to do so.
and I said, well, when we get home from this vacation, we'll do a fundraiser, and we'll buy some land and for a farm. And the bus flipped over, and I ended up in the hospital with a broken shoulder, and woke up that morning to a completely unsolicited email from two people in California who are each going to leverage their match grant, a husband and wife. And so whatever it was that they did, and they each got the match grant, and that was what bought our farm. So it was an incredible time to be like, so, when you're in a kind of accident like that, and 3 people died on the bus, like, there's a period where you're just so grateful to be alive, that's nothing else matters. And then on top of that, to be gifted with our dream was incredible. And third obstacle to triumph story that I want to share really quickly is that have I won't get into the history, but there are hundreds of neem trees on our farm right now, and they are 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, oral cancer, And I looked everywhere for, and I read medical science journals and found that neem, this extract from neem, had efficacy against squamous cell. And so, of course, I can't get extract, but I said, all right, stick this under your tongue and don't stop and drink the water and, keep at it. And he had only 3 sessions of chemo, but by the time he got to Delhi to have his tongue removed, the cancer was not in his mouth anymore. So he and I know it was the neem, and he's doing fine. He still eats neem, and now we're making neem part of our agricultural journey, because I'm here in India right now researching what neem can do, and all over this country I'm hearing stories of, it's an incredible pesticide. It's at the bark. I just met with some women the other day who are researching the bark as a cervical cancer treatment. It's widely known against squamous cell. And I've got a friend in Massachusetts right now who I'm sending the extract to for squamous. And so, yeah, it was an incredible discovery, and we're trying to make the best of it, because I think there's a lot of potential. And right before this meeting started, I just got news that Kenya is getting away from, I didn't even read the whole article, but they're moving away from chemical pesticides and hazardous pesticides, which means there's huge opportunities for making neem more normal in the region. So I'm thrilled, and it is very auspicious timing.
Yeah.
So, okay, those are my 3 obstacles.
Thank you, Terri.
Well,
I love that story with the neem.
She's got me excited about some of the greatest hits. I want to throw in an obstacle-like story that I think is just a fun one too. We haven't used the word family, but that really is how Baobab and STA have evolved. It's very family style. And so some of our programs might have emerged from a loose governance style of Terri and Kaito and encountering problems that needed urgent help. So medical outreach, there was Doctors Without Borders coming by and going out and getting people cataract surgery on mobile, her kids participating in that. But, we've never been particularly amazing at matching fundraising for a very tiny organization and the amount of good and work we try to do in this big family. So Terri calls me up one day distraught. This is many years ago. We're having a very bad funding month, meaning there's no money. And she gets an outreach from 7 Australians on their way to South Africa for the World Cup. She says, and Zanzibar, for those of you know, this is Bagamoyo's coastal Tanzania. Zanzibar is a few hours ferry ride away. It's not cheap when you're broke and feeding others. She said, well, I don't know what to do. I've got, Justice, that's her baby. She's like, do I even go out and see these guys? They just sent me an email out of the blue. So long story short, she pays the $120, gets on the ferry, and they, out of their gratitude, having found Baobab online, hand her roughly 17,000 US dollars in a donation on their way to go party in Cape Town and watch the talk. Those kinds of, we don't like to rely on Providence, but there's some amazing stories where it has swept in over the years and provided some amazing moments.
You get really leery of depending on it, but it keeps happening. It's incredible. Yeah, I don't know what made me go there. There was no indication that they would give that much money. And then I made that trip, brought some of the kids from the orphanage with me. And then it ended up to be $22,000 back then.
My memory.
That's the kitchen. That's the kitchen plus more that they built.
Oh, have they visited since that?
No, they never. I'm still in touch with 2 of them. There were 6 guys. I'm still in touch with only 2 of them. So one of them is a sponsor of our kids, with the kids at our school.
That's incredible.
So with a little help from Providence, we eat obstacles for breakfast, I think.
Before we open up for Q&A, I would really love, Terri, if you could share the story about visiting our Kenyan trials. So Terry really wanted to see, we have trials with EnSoil Algae in Kenya that Meredith is leading. And I don't, how many years has it been, Mer? 1, 2?
2 years, the first year of the pilot programs. I'm just loving these stories too, y'all. The first pilot programs were flooded out. So the second year pilot programs in all of the different fields are the ones that Terry was able to visit post research there with our friends and partners.
And Terry, tell them a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I was looking forward to it so much, and I got there and it was just amazing. Patrick knows his stuff. He knows his country very well, knows everywhere we went, people knew Patrick. And we covered a lot of ground. We covered 800 miles of Kenya in like 3 or 4 days. It was crazy because we were supposed to only cover a short amount of time. But anyway, so we got to see what you're looking at here is Sukuma wiki, which was glowing and radiant. And I've seen Sukuma wiki in Tanzania, and it's nice, but it doesn't shine. So how the old plots had EnSoil were still showing a huge impact, even though they weren't still applying it. So we basically saw 2 farms, and then but the second farm was kind of, no, 3 farms, but the third one was my favorite, and we saw rice and and it was clearly evident. But when I stood in the cornfield, on the left-hand side was this like just sad looking corn. And on the right-hand side was the EnSoil plot. And the difference, I sat there, I stood there and I cried because it was like I was seeing something like justice, like you see a dog in a shelter that is sad and weak, and then you see later that after picture, and I could see that a wrong was being righted in this farm, and it was really beautiful. And these guys were so focused on, yields and size and all these measurements that I am not familiar with. And I was just kind of on a little bit of a different kind of a high from it, because it wasn't my farm, but yet it was just beautiful to see this potential in action, what I'd heard about. So we had a great couple of days, and my litmus test for the whole, if I still liked Patrick after driving around in a car with him for 800 miles in a car that looked not unlike the one that I drove in high school, it was a good time. And we also met with some smallholder sugar. I took him to see a friend whose husband runs manages thousands of smallholder sugar plantations, and they I would just love to see a few of those people get their hands on some EnSoil, because I think that it would raise the industry standard. Once a few of those farmers could see it, I think that others would catch on. So yeah, thank you very much for letting me go up there and see everything in action.
Well, we were living an epic journey through you too. We really just appreciate all the miles and the collaboration too. A lot of learning was happening there. So we look forward to the future and where it goes now. Long roads ahead, I can see. We're working with the same partners to work on accessibility in other countries in North and South Africa. right now in Central Africa, everywhere. Accessibility is a main focus, for the company. Decentralized, affordability, accessibility. I'm curious to know, and I don't remember, we talked so much about this trip. I think we were all crying when we were talking about this trip, so I may have forgotten to ask you this, but some of the other, techniques, practices, of those that have been there forever, are there some that are being implemented with the EnSoil in those fields? Are they're trying other things that they've heard, for instance, here, moringa trees are grown for a bio-based fertilizer. Were there other things like that you learned on the trip with Patrick?
The Kenya trip, I was mostly focused just on EnSoil and their trials.
Mhm.
And I don't think, but I'm always interested in medicinals and what we can learn from. I mean, I am stunned at how much we actually have on our farm, and here in India, I'm learning more potential for what we can do back at home, and I'm thrilled. Like I was on a 26-hour train ride down to Salem to visit a neem factory a couple weeks ago, and I met a moringa scientist. And so it's funny you mentioned moringa, and he'd written a book on moringa, and he was in the bunk next to my sleeper car, and so we had a great talk about moringa, and I've learned a lot about steam. One thing I'm really interested in doing is steam distillation. I think that has enormous potential on our farm. I visited a lot of factories that are using extraction methods that are more aggressive, but I'm really into the potential for steam distillation to help us have another way of getting oil. So.
I want to jump in on your question though, Meredith, because we talked about the fits and starts with the farm. When we used to work with an old hand. He was a Peace Corps volunteer from Tanzania who had a farm doing everything under the sun. It was beautiful. I mean, he had bamboo, he had algae, he had black soldier fly. He taught us beekeeping. I wasn't there. I'm a beekeeper, but he taught folks at the Shamba beekeeping. And we talked with Israel about rolling out a train the trainer smallholder targeted program sort of modeled off the 1 acre fund, which had done some great work with composting, etc. But just bringing it back to the current, unfortunately he passed away. And that was, again, we weren't necessarily cohering around the farm yet to scale that or to begin working on that. But I've tracked a lot of these things for years. And you think about the influence of traditional practices that are dwindling when well-resourced companies come with another green revolution, I believe is the news in Africa. But I track ECPay. Now, our journey has been a protein one, a lot of feed, and your specialization is a lagger for us. This, the bat guano of insects, this poop. But, for something that's behind the results and all the amazing trials that EnSoil has and the results that Terri was just showing us, if you map that onto the efforts in Kenya and Tanzania to develop consistency in feed markets, to have these types of options available, there's a 50-plus-year-old entomology organization in Nairobi that's brought a lot of attention to the power of, both, using natural solutions for pests, but then the work that we do with insects. And World Bank caught a hold of this. There's a woman named Dorte Werner who wrote a book for the World Bank 3 years ago, projecting 50 million tons of bug poop as a critical tool for smallholders to do this, to develop in parallel to all attempts to, scale up and use conventional industrial techniques. So I just think that EnSoil, its consistency, its results. I love Terri's story about the latent effects after application, because of course you're rebuilding in a living system that happens to be the most complicated in the world. And it also pairs with, the FAO is now finally called the soil microbiome a game changer for food and ag. Nowhere could that be more accessible especially with a tool like EnSoil than for smallholders in places like East Africa. So I've got a lot of context of how perfect that Kenya story is for what's needed.
Yeah,
And
thank you for sharing that.
As soon as I get off this call, I'm going to read that announcement about Kenya and pesticides and forward it to Patrick, because I can't. We talked for so much about, I can't wait to hear how the farmers that I met are going to be impacted by this and what they think and what he thinks. And so I think it's really big news for the region, because Kenya and Tanzania, they don't always copy each other, but there's a lot of that. And Tanzania had just had a good meeting, I think yesterday or today, that about organics and native seeds as well. So yeah, I'm hopeful.
Oh, I'm hopeful too. I know one thing we've learned, our team, we work in change management, and that transition and the support offered through the transition is the most important part. So I'll hope, to read within those headlines and underneath too, that there's a good support network and opportunities for alternatives, practices and inputs and things there offered to the growers. And we'll be there to help support any transitions too, hopefully, with you guys. Yeah, there's just so much that there's so many answers and solutions sitting right there within the problems that we're missing if we're not working together.
Absolutely.
Okay, a few more minutes. Anyone else have any questions, comments?
I would just like to say hi, I'm Denise. I've known Terri and Michael for a very long time. And I just want to thank everyone at EnSoil, because as you can see how excited Terri gets about this. And it's really, we've been hearing about it for months, probably almost a year. And so it's really great to see like this progressing and how excited she gets about it. And, it's just, look at the smile on her face. This is, I'm so glad we've made this connection, because it's really going to do wonders for our farm. So thank you.
Yes. Shout out Jason.
Yeah. And
well, we would have gotten connected at some point. Because Michael, like you said, you were hearing about us, but yeah.
But no, I want to double down on that. Yeah, because we were talking about before the call. EnSoil is, I know that we've already talked about how much we feel that